And so for those of you who mysteriously managed to miss this piece of information, here at the Columbia Global Centers, Middle East, expect to miss. And this program tonight is part of the Amman Labs program, which is an element of the Studio X Global Network. That's an initiative run by the Graduate School of Architectural Planning and Preservation at Columbia University. It's also kind of part of an X-Week event, which also coincides with spring break, kimmie trips, studio travel projects. And tonight is also kind of an addition, a complementary event to Frederick Levrat's Studio Knowledge City. This year is taught in and on Amman in collaboration with Philip Anselon, who's here with us as well, the director of the Laboratory for Applied Building Science at Columbia University's GSAP. The format of tonight's event is sort of, you guys are very lucky. We've been looking forward to this day, and I think with the turnout, it looks like everybody's been looking forward to this evening. We're going to have two presentations. The first by Frederick Levrat, professor at the Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture. The second by Bernard Khouri, Lebanese architect from Beirut. I will introduce the speaker before the presentations. After that, we're going to have Jamal Jabri, who's the co-founder of Fabrique and Visualizing Palestine, lead a panel discussion, and also we'll be opening up the floor for your questions. So we're going to start with Frederick's presentation. Frederick Levrat is professor of architecture at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architectural Planning and Preservation. He's been there since 1994, and he's also a visiting professor at Pratt Institute. Levrat set up his architecture office in New York in '94, which expanded to Geneva in '97 and Kabul in 2004. The award-winning office has been working on a global scale since then, from the European Space Agency's Research Center at the University of Geneva to primary schools, clinics, an airport road master plan in Kabul, and a technopark headquarters in Dubai. Levrat is in Amman this week, as I mentioned, as part of the studio course at GSAP, part of this kind of ongoing research with the students on the Knowledge City. This semester focusing on the role of transportation infrastructure in the city in creating place for the dissemination of information. This course, as I mentioned as well, is taught with Philip Anselon, the director of the Laboratory for Applied Building Science and faculty member at GSAP. So perhaps we can start.
Well, thank you, Nora. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. After such an introduction, it's hard to show anything. I have to let you have your imagination. It sounds even better. So, Knowledge City is a theme that we discussed recently, and that seems to be part of. I probably have to start with some image. Always easier. There we go. All right. So, in some way, I mean, as Nora introduced me, there is the number of facets in my life, trying to do some research, trying to do some buildings. I think we talked last time on Monday, no, 2 days ago. I'm sorry, I'm confused with traveling and change of date and weekend and so on between the different cultural environments. But we had a roundtable discussion 3 days ago about Knowledge City. I think it's a theme that I've been trying to develop, looking at how, not necessarily we don't necessarily have an information city, but maybe an information system, but that information system is being experienced by people, it's being lived in that sense, it's being transformed as a knowledge city. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about knowledge city. I would rather try to talk about maybe another kind of subtitle, which is called materialization of information. How are we as architects able to find an expression, a way to talk about maybe virtuality, maybe all this notion of visual or the notion of abstraction into what we call usually an artificial language. If we go back to Marshall McLuhan, or people who make theory about information network, and clearly we are living in a network. Clearly a network of relation, a network of people, a network of infrastructure, a network of streets, but also now a network of information, a network of Facebook, of telephone, of all sorts of digital conditions. So to what extent architecture has information, to what extent architecture becomes an information system, it's already there. It's always there. Any piece of architecture is loaded with information. If we follow the quote from, I believe, Fernando Pessoa, that some people have different point of view to say that architecture is an uncorruptible witness of our society. Architecture is very much a materialization of everything that has enabled architecture to be what it is. So this very complex condition of materialization of information through an architectonic, through an architectural language, is quite interesting and complex and somehow unachievable. Because you don't go from immaterial to material seamlessly. On the other hand, you can also say the opposite, where any materialization is loaded with social, political, economical information. And as we know, this city, this region, this neighborhood is quite active and quite loaded with social, political, economical layers of tension, activity, of information. So how do we, as architects, start looking at the overlap between, let's say, the mind and the body, between the virtual and the physical? How I have been playing with this theme and how this is a condition of our research, but over the last maybe 18 years that I've been playing with this theme, the level of information, the level of virtuality, the level of immateriality has shot up. It's quite interesting to keep on researching what are the actors that are making architecture. But over the last few years, architecture used to be really about stone, about mortar, about steel, concrete, glass. Can it be also about network? Can it be about far-away relation? Can it be about understanding space, maybe with the mind, not just with the body? How much is this world made by a virtual environment? How much is the virtual influence the physical? I'm going to go through a few quick, kind of fun examples from some people who think it's better to be known on movie, which can be complete role, stupid role, funny role, whatever, and are being recognized officially as somebody who can lead one of the, which is currently considered the fifth economy of the world. This is not a role, this is an architecture, this is an actual job. We also know stories or lies or conditions that are being propagated all around. Yeah, if we can have the light down a little bit, maybe we'll see better. But we also know how much that directly, literally affects the physical environment. So this kind of reversal from actual physical action to storytelling to virtual to concept. In fact, in the real world, we realize that the virtual, the fabricated, can directly, literally influence the physical. In this region, we have seen also this interweaving, this meshing between things that seem to be just information, and they created kind of a redistribution of power to information, redistribution of who had access to what information, And then literally invading the physical space of the public space of Cairo, for instance, but also potentially in Tunisia, in Amman, or in other places, questioning how information, how communication, how physical space, how physical power could be redistributed, how political power could be understood differently. How does it affect architecture? I mean, it's surprising that even some of the most well-known and celebrated piece of architecture, like the Bird's Nest by Herzog and de Meuron, turn out to be a backdrop for an event, for something that is to be filmed, something that is to be celebrated for, I don't know, about a month, and then have no idea what to do with it. And right now it's kind of a giant dinosaur, quite a beautiful piece of architecture, but it's kind of abandoned, and the Chinese are planning to transform this zone into a shopping mall and maybe using it as a central atrium. They don't exactly know what to do. So how does architecture either play to those events, play to those images, play to television, etc.? Or how does it resist? How does it become critical to image, critical to virtuality? We could look at it even on the urban level, where some entire new city are developed as an image, as a single word that can be understood in the virtuality of the mind, maybe much more than the body. The pan, for instance, as you can see those 3 pans that you know probably well, it's kind of an amazing piece of marketing. With a single word, the pan, you make a drawing which is completely 2D, but it's existing in the mind of the people, it's existing as a concept, as an image, it's a pleasure of the mind. In many ways, I think it's interesting. Can we build for the pleasure of the mind? Can we build not just for the pleasure of the body, but also for the pleasure of the mind? There's a big difference between building for the pleasure of the mind as a complex puzzle and building something that's to consume for the mind. The big question is, when you materialize that concept, when you materialize that image, what does it become? What is it? And in many ways, Dubai is almost fun or interesting for architects because they literally bring those questions to materialization with all the potential problem in question. How is it to live in an image? How is it to be in the image? Again, as a laboratory, it's kind of amazing and interesting. As a real life, what kind of society, what kind of group, what kind of culture, what kind of beach, what kind of water it is even a really interesting question. I mean, we could go on around the world. I mean, we can stay around Dubai. As my friend George Gatagritis was saying, this kind of new authenticity, which is at once controlled and irrepressible, scripted and disorienting, unique and derivative, amusing and depressing. I don't need to add much to that. It's really a major question. But I think it brings us, and it's kind of an introduction in this idea of the knowledge city, where the city is to be experienced by the body, it's also experienced with the mind, with the eyes. It's a multi-layer condition. We cannot talk about today purely about reality being purely physical. Reality is a multiple layer of physicality and virtuality. It's as much constructed in our mind, and as architects, when we construct environment, we also have to understand that there are some constructed environments that maybe are not just physical. They are clearly historical, political, cultural, economical. All those layers do affect very strongly the presence of a place. Can architects deal with that? Well, as I mentioned before, architects always deal with that. Very often they ignore that. Very often they think that the context is the physical context. But I think the context is also very much, let's say, historical, social, political, cultural. And maybe Bernard will talk about that better than me on that freedom. So I think architecture can play a specific role, can be really interesting at that juncture between the mind and the body, between the virtual and the physical. It's not an easy task, it's not a simple task, but I think it can really be a place of legitimacy for architecture. Not an architecture as just responding to the developer need was only value become a value of money, but trying to have kind of a possibility to become an interface, a certain philosophical or cultural value of responding to all those conditions that are more, let's say, mental and at the same time that are to be experienced by the body. Some artists have been playing with that, kind of reversing the notion of the hierarchy of representation versus space, where the position of the body in space become essential as a way to decode, as a way to decipher information, as a way to understand our own set of cultural reading, our own desire of simplification, of simplicity, because we prefer to see a rectangle inside a rectangle, rather than seeing the complexity just of time and space. So how do we achieve that, or how does one research that and achieve that? I had the chance this week to be here with some Columbia students where I've been trying to teach this idea of materialization of information. Unfortunately, before you will see that beautiful project, you will have to see 5 or 10 of my own project, which sometimes are not as beautiful as a student project, but at least I'm trying to work with this idea of negotiation between the virtual, the physical, and the time, and the visual. Many years ago, I worked with Amman, and I think his sentence, which really affected me the most, was this idea of building to the pleasure of the mind. Obviously, we're being criticized if a roof is leaking, we are being told that the insulation was not correct. The physical measurements are always very clear. We can tell you exactly what kind of square meter, what kind of volume, what kind of cost even things are related to. But the pleasure of the view, which is somewhat material, the pleasure of the sequence of space, the pleasure of complex condition that we can only dream about, even so we cannot necessarily use double height space, atrium, complex rhythm, sequence, and element. I have ordered my project simply by scale, going from the smallest object to entire city scale, and I will try to go through it. Starting with the maybe most banal object, which is a metal object, which I did finishing my study, so it's quite some years ago, but I still like it very much. It's a very simple chair. For me, maybe we can already see in that chair a few conditions that you will see throughout the work. It's not about ornamentation, it's not about adding some little details. The design is about questioning our cultural code of representation, about trying to materialize the virtual into the physical. How do we do that with something that is mostly appreciated by underside and our back? How do we make a chair that make our brain react, enjoy, or question how we have learned to work? This is what I call an axonometric chair. It's an axonometric plan, because a plan basically is a 2D compression of a 3D representation, and it kind of play between 2D and 3D. So if you start walking around that simple element, you realize that it's not necessarily what you thought it was, and your brain again wants to build something that you think you know, and in fact it's a very thin piece of metal, but its construction is, as you can see on the floor, is and the floor has become a base, so it becomes very physical in that sense. It allows almost a bouncing condition of the chaise longue or the edge. This idea of materialization of representation, of taking a system of representation and kind of unfolding, taking the logic of our cultural code of representation and using that as a strategy to design something that is at the same time a mental construction and very much a physical construction, is something I personally get a kick out, and I've been trying to play with. Again, not going by chronological order, obviously I had to do a few projects to get a large exhibition of my work, but this is growing from small to larger, somewhere at the level of a room maybe. I had to do a few exhibitions, and the strategy was really how do we show images. Obviously, it might be possible to show space or building, But here it was really about showing image, considering the budget and the time we had. And I wanted the image to start being the definer of space, an image to be there by itself, not to be stuck on the wall, because then the wall, gravity and all of that is a primary element. Gravity will always exist, gravity will always be there, but can we, again, challenge it, question it? So it's a bunch of fishing wires that are suspended in the ceiling. It's a very simple manufacture. The model, which are physical in that sense, are resting on the ground. The drawings are wrapping around, going in a circle around the space. It's interesting because then you can really look at view corridor, you can look at circulation of people, you can try to organize space based on the visual condition rather than necessarily the physical condition. Again, without much design per se, it's the same band that is just continuous and transforming. A few years later, I had to do another exhibition at the New York Institute of Technology. As you can see by that time, it's double-sided. But it's basically the same idea, trying to look if we could question what are the world, what is information, what is the space. Continuing with exhibition, I was asked to do a project called, I didn't create the project, it's called Swiss Section. Since I'm Swiss, somehow they thought I could do something. I was more interested, it was about checking how a master plan of a city, supposedly from their point of view in Switzerland, was more three-dimensional than just a 2D master plan, which would be flat on a piece of paper because of the mountain, because of terrain, as you know quite well in Amman. My strategy was to do this kind of peeling surfaces where you would take the surface of the wall again and try to expand it into space, how the 2D and the 3D would come together. As a method of operation, I didn't want to have any support space, support element, but trying to work just with laser cut plexiglass, hundreds of sheets of plexiglass that were only of 3 different widths. What I remember, I guess, was 1 foot, 2 foot, and 5 foot. And those sheets would just interlock and basically peel from the walls, having this notion of being a wall surface and how that surface, that very, very thin surface, probably about 4 or 5 millimeters, would start weaving and coming into place, into space. It became a very nice abstract construction of those rhythm, and again, almost making a, when I say building for the mind, being for the pleasure of the mind, just a simple element of repetition, transformation, and iteration. At the end of the day, it also became very much a support for exhibition, so maybe the role of what was exhibited and what was supporting exhibition was more back into place. More recently, we did a small store, and I'm not even showing you the plan how small this store is. It's absolutely tiny. And it's so small that, I mean, again, it's in Soho, it's in New York. New York is sort of big building, and Soho has a very high value of square footage or square meter. So we're kind of happy to have to do a flagship store for a small chocolate store. The idea there was that we didn't have any room for storage. Most of the store have, as the name calls it, you have storage and you have display. So we kind of cut down that boundary and we merge storage and display, where the storage and the display, and the storage is the display is the storage. It turned out that we had to design, in fact, the boxes, the way to hold those boxes, but in fact there are thousands of boxes, simple cardboard boxes that hold very expensive truffle. And as a Swiss, this is kind of Indian chocolate. I'm not a big fan, but that's beside the point. I'm a client. I appreciate how we could work with them. And almost as a digital condition, almost as a set of pixels, you could read how the consumption of the physical element was changing, the aspect was changing, the image of the shop. So reducing the language, getting down to very, very simple elements, but then looking at how those elements can inscribe change, can inscribe forces, can inscribe presence, can inscribe information. It's a tiny shop, but again, we've got plenty of design award. I don't know, sometimes it's easier to hold something very clearly conceptual when it's very small. Talking about another small project in a big city, it's a project for a showroom in Midtown Manhattan, 37th Street and 7th Avenue. As you can see, brutally dense environment, and very, very orthogonal and dense grid. I mean, this is a plan of 1811 where apart from downtown, which was kind of more or less naturally developed, then the first zone here is being developed on some grid responding to the ship and the trading lane. And then from here on, from 1811, everything is created as one system. So it's an economical imposition. I won't go into too much history of that. So working in that kind of system, I started looking at how we could kind of question that preconceived notion that everything is orthogonal, everything has a precise distance between them, everything that you see is what you get, and trying to create a little bit of ambiguity, a little bit of destabilization, where you don't know anymore where is the space. The space that you see is the space that you have to challenge. By folding this wall between two galleries, one gallery here and one gallery there, some offices, plenty of elevator, fire escape, etc. The idea was to create something where you would have to question your senses, you would have to use your physical body to kind of feel almost where was the wall, where was the edge. Looking at a wall that is not straight, or looking at something that wasn't built necessarily as a perspectival trompe-l'oeil or fake perceptive condition, but nevertheless that was fairly ambiguous. White on white with one big horizontal band, white floor, white chair, white everything, white wall. On many ways, which was a way to make it cheaper because cheap trucks come white, but also to start having people to almost, you should see how they walk through that space, kind of touching the wall, trying to find out where it is, how far, stilting in, stilting out. The horizontal band becomes just a reference, and it's now full of display and object, as much inside those niches as between, but I think it kind of worked well of creating a spaces that needs to be tested, that needs to be experienced. I mean, my kind of philosophical or humanistic point of view, that I believe everybody is different. Everybody needs to not consume image, consume information in a kind of boring way or stupid way or premeditated way, but to really experience life, experience space, and make up their own mind, if they like it, if they don't like it. But try not to look at architecture as a casual condition, but as an experiential condition. What is very interesting is when you start building walls that are not vertical, when you start building walls that are not straight, then you kind of also challenge the trade, you also challenge the way things are supposed to be built. And as you see in this picture, we ended up having to cut a segment or section that were all vertical to be able to make the tilt. Carpenter and construction people needs to have a certain set of drawing. We have, again, as much as I was talking about the axonometric as is cultural code, in architecture we have so many set of cultural code of what is a plan, what is a section, what is an autometric projection, etc. Nora mentioned briefly that I was asked to design this small project here for the European Space Agency and the University of Geneva. It's a very strange project here with information. I mean, first of all, it's about a data center. It's about digesting thousands of bits of information. We send into space a satellite to, they were planning to send into space a satellite to discover new planets. So the University of Geneva was the first astronomy department that found a new system to discover new planets outside of the system, our solar system. But they were ready to launch a satellite within 3 years, to design it, to make it and to launch it, while to change the plan localisé d'affectation, to change the local urban plan for this zone that was kind of a rural condition, would have taken 5 to 7 years of administration of Geneva. So we had to renovate an old barn, an old system. And as you can see here, all the wooden columns and all the wooden beams are traditional old elements. But then they wanted also to have all sorts of air conditioning for the computer, all sorts of things. So we ended up lifting the entire structure, digging a hole under, and then putting it back onto some new structure. The idea here is, again, can you provide a language, this abstract language that is rooted to concept, but on the other hand is very pragmatic. What I try to provide here is this kind of abstract system of a module that just repeats itself, almost like a digital module, but just a metric module in a way, that would just compete with the existing structure. That module is okay in the facade, it's useful in the facade, but it's like what you have seen in every single facade. We're trying to turn it back in to try to really organize all the space related to that module, except for a few elements really for the body, for the movement into space, through a few double height spaces. It's quite interesting when those two systems meet and clash together, where you have the extreme rigor of one system hitting the rigor of another kind of structural system. Now I mentioned a brief passage I made in Kabul, or brief, maybe a year and a half or 2 years, building school, clinics. I think here it's a very different discourse. Obviously, you could say there's no virtuality, it's all pragmatic. On the other hand, even though the design is extremely pragmatic, extremely direct, and based very much on a mode of construction, we were producing those interlocking bricks, simple hand-pressed brick. As you can see here, they are pressing this brick by hand. But making, again, kind of a modular system that could be assembled and have reinforced concrete, reinforcement in the middle and poured cement. But on the other hand, it's kind of a global virtuality that is also coming into play, where USAID, the United States, kind of invading, liberating Afghanistan, trying to provide things. So somehow you end up being caught in a very, very global condition of fairly immaterial transaction, and on the other hand, you're really working on the most pragmatic way of trying to teach people how to build this kind of a system that would be more ecological, because you don't get to reinforce concrete without using wood, which you don't have. So it was mostly humanitarian work, quite different than what I was used to doing in a way. We started the house prototype, proposing new villages and things like that. But again, people who had money wanted to have super decorated thing and wanted anything that was more or less modest or normal. People who didn't have money would stay in tent or in mud house. Very complex condition, wherever you go, whatever you try to do. That social, political, economical, even so in the most pragmatic, obvious condition, you cannot escape it. In a way, maybe you see the imagery that is being passed around, where some people, if they look a certain way, are supposed to be bad guy or good guy, but I must say I had a very good time with all those people there. But I went back to New York, I went back to teaching. I must say it was kind of a parenthesis in my life. And I'm not going to parenthesis how much time I'm waiting for now, so cut me short. So I will go fast through some other project. Project for Islamic rug collection, will be the largest Islamic rug collection, to do a museum of the knot, which, again, how do you make a new museum? How do you make something that wanted to be an icon, wanted to be an important building, out of an architectural language? My technique, again, would be to reduce the language to very, very simple elements, 5 bands and letting those bands knot themselves together, letting those bands interact, and see how the kind of strategical process is more important than the design process, and letting those elements come together initially through drawing, model, etc. Finding a system of repetition, iteration, interlocking, and it's a project that is on hold, that is still alive, and hopefully should get built at some point. But for me, what is interesting again is this idea that we can create an internal language of architecture, almost an autonomous language of architecture that is not necessarily associated to so-called icon of the past or icon of the imagery, but that can try to be kind of a self-referential system of going to Kabul. I ended up going a lot through Dubai, and going through Dubai I ended up meeting a lot of people who wanted people to build, and being an architect and etc. I got to interact with Dubai. I think the next few projects about Dubai and Abu Dhabi are, as usually for other very large tower, gigantic things. Unfortunately, maybe, or fortunately, I don't know, unrealized tower, design tower, where the client would always tell me, oh, I love what you have done, but I don't really like it. So again, you have to understand what means appreciating or not. But looking at Dubai and the towers process in Dubai, it's hard not to look at the notion of surface, how much a tower is consumed as a surface, it's consumed as an image, versus the way it's consumed as space. With some students at Columbia, I started doing some research about, and within my office, how much facade and structure and space have evolved, how much we're becoming more and more disjuncted somehow between the facade and the space. We looked at how we could make surface space, how we could, through single sheet of paper or single sheet of cardboard, fold space, bring me the fold space so the space can become three-dimensional. So we could almost reduce the space purely to the image, but then by doing that, challenging what is image, challenging what is space. So those Dubai projects, and I call them Dubai, but some are in Abu Dhabi, those Dubai projects, for me, were a way to kind of embrace the image, but also to question it, to challenge it. Those projects also were always done extremely quickly. You know, you have kind of 2 weeks to make a proposal. But I think I really look at this theory of can we build just a sheet of paper? Can we build just a surface? How could that surface also be kind of scaleless or as minimal as possible? And within that surface, could we introduce some bedroom to the hotel? That almost intentionally has the most boring space in the world. Because we felt that's what they wanted. They wanted easily manageable space, but they wanted an image. We gave them something that at the same time an image, and it's also resisting the notions of image. The image you can't really describe, you can't really hold on to. It's an image that is also changing on the point of view. So hopefully it's what I would call a non-consumable image. Talking about image and structure, there were other projects like a showroom in an industrial zone where we wanted an image in a space, kind of an outdoor reception space where they could exhibit their design, their clothes, their Porsche, their Ferrari, and all of that. And we decided to kind of make this ambiguity again between the backdrop and this roof, just as one big. Around Dubai, they wanted also housing, but usually their housing were very fat, very repetitive. But one thing they always want to maximize the FAR allocation is to have as much balcony as possible, because balcony are not part of the FAR. So suddenly you have the facade and the balcony, which become very valuable for them as a monetary condition, and then you have the image, which is also something they really want. So you end up really concentrating on facade here. How do you give them a balcony and give them an image without giving them an image of the balcony, which I must say I didn't like so much. So what we try to do is to give three different planes, as you saw maybe in the plan, but also abstract the balcony as if the edge of the building didn't exist. The edge of the building was just a series or layer of pseudo facade, of abstract facade. Facade that, in fact, we're starting to question the edge. Is it structure, is it facade, is it balcony, is it function, is it image, is it space? Again, an attempt at playing with that. Another of those projects we didn't like at all. We tried a little bit harder to get something we might like better, so it's maybe not as interesting as a project. But that's another tower in the middle of nowhere. So again, how do you materialize information? How do you design something when you have nothing around? As the context is purely speculative money. The FAR is enormous, 30-story, huge podium, small basement, parking on the second, third, fourth, and fifth floor. We kind of played with this idea of taking the sidewalk here, trying to see if there could be a sidewalk, if there could be. And I'm sorry, on this image we don't see the sidewalk, but taking that sidewalk and wrapping it and folding it up. Again, trying to make an icon that would not have a collection of iconic elements, but that, because at the end of the day you have to make a crown, you have to make a podium, you have to make this. We're trying to use the same image or the same concept for the crown than for shielding the parking garage. Trying to see how, from one side or another, the element will look quite different. Wrapping this kind of thing around. Because they wanted so much this notion of image and facade, and give them a very uneconomical building, maybe by having an enormous amount of facade, where not only the wrapping goes in image form, but also physically. Obviously, that kind of killed the project, as they wanted maximum amount of surface exposure, but exposure to the media, exposure to the image, rather than exposure to the elements. The last tower I'm showing is a tower where we tried to, pretty large tower in Abu Dhabi, but we're trying to deal with the notion of, again, an image that could be resisted, an image that is not necessarily static, an image that could be understood differently depending how you want to read. Again, it's kind of a self-similar modification, very boring, basic plan, A being the building, B being the parking, podium, but on the other hand, they wanted to front diagonal. So we tried some sort of a diamond-shaped plan, but the main idea was to see if we could link, again, this podium to the vertical, if we could question this idea of the static, beautiful, perfectly designed architecture. So it's kind of a very imperfect architecture. It's an architecture that questions itself, and an architecture that kind of rises almost beyond its own condition. In fact, there are 5 rotating elements, but this one is a vertical one, so that one is 4 degrees past the vertical. So we have this idea, this kind of feeling of this element kind of wrapping on itself and continuing moving. But, you know, we kind of offer a possible reading. We don't necessarily, we were imagining this idea of movement, this idea of dialogue within the facade, within the architecture. On the other hand, everybody can see different things through a fairly abstract approach. Oh, well, there's one more large project, I guess. This is for Yerevan. When Dubai collapsed, Dubai engineer were trying to do a project around and kept on calling me for another city. And an amazing site right in the center, I mean, this kind of the parliament, the opera house. It's the main little square here. And tucked behind it, they had desire to develop a huge hotel, shopping mall, office, whatever, you name it. Extremely congested, obviously loaded politically, socially, economically. On the other hand, it's very hard as an architect to say, well, I don't understand the full picture, I refuse to do the project. try to understand, but I think everybody understands that we have limitation to our ability to understand the full condition. Very packed section. A plan that tried to work almost as an amoeba that tried to soften all those dense, complicated conditions around. And a facade that tried to respond to different visual push and pull. The first iteration we had was to suggest deformation, to suggest impossibility to grasp the reading. I mean, it's maybe like one of those Varini things. It's a vertical ellipse, but then we suggest deformation, we suggest resistance, we suggest almost impossibility to read it. Obviously, they didn't like that, so we went to something slightly more elegant visually, whereas the Louvre are starting to open up, giving view, transfer. So again, it's a game on facade, how much facade almost could be changed. I mean, ideally this project should open and close its eyes and look at Mount Ararat or wink at some nice people passing in this square. But I think it was a way to, we made some opening towards a developer office trying to offer some slightly more critical thing than just a big mess. We could go to urban project, and I don't know, maybe I'm going to skip the urban project. This is for a new campus in Singapore, but same system, nice image, no comment. Barcelona, they wanted to move the river, which was here, to literally move on the other side of the delta to 5 kilometers away. So you don't necessarily invent those crazy projects. They really are into brief. How do you make a new system that respects nature a bit more than just expanding the grade that Barcelona is very famous for, but still completely imposing on the landscape? I want to insist maybe on this project for the reunification of Berlin between the East and West Berlin, creating a new center of the world, center of Europe, and we work with art, New York, art, Portugal, kind of look at what means center politically, what means center geographically, what means center almost as this incredibly simplistic center of power. Again, side loaded with history between the Reichstag or the Spree-Bogen competition, as it was called. Hitler and Albert Speer kind of redesigned the curve of the river to make it perfectly circular, so you could have a perfect circle. All those elements, again, heavily loaded into the project. We started looking at how we can, again, precise circle, precise centrality, looking at all those layers that Berlin has, all those layers of kind of a palimpsest of tension, activity, condition. And we made a project that really wanted to have multiple centers, center of democracy, center of political power, center of maybe economy, center of NGOs, etc. Out of the 850 projects that were submitted, we were surprised to be finalists. But we were a bunch of young kids. I think I was 21 years old when I did that. And we never managed to continue. But I think what we were suggesting is that center doesn't necessarily mean centrality. Center and design of large urban form is not always necessarily completely controlled. Sometimes you can have a concept, an idea, and design it, develop it. I would like to finish. So we ended up with things we didn't necessarily knew what we were doing. It was resulting from a process, but I think it was interesting. I would like to continue and finish with collaboration here in Amman, whereas a student from Columbia University was supposed to cooperate with a municipality about extremely complex and extremely interesting network of bus circulation rerouting, which are an entire can of worms that I'm not going to open because it's beyond complexity and it's really interesting but also very difficult to manage. But we're looking at how this infrastructure of circulation, bus circulation, public space could have also a layer of information. A layer of information which currently doesn't really exist in Amman, there is basically no information when birds are starting, when birds are leaving, when birds are arriving. There's no information where the birds are going. There's no real system. And we did not necessarily understood all of that. Maybe we were used in New York that subway would be announced every 3.5 minutes, etc. But what we're looking at also as architects is maybe going back to this notion of materialization of information. How can we materialize information? How can we find a system to express information? We had 5 students who are here. Each one started looking at it differently. I'm going to very briefly go through their project. One looking at information as a visual construct, another kind of visual construct, but almost a visual ambiguity or visual construction. Somebody looking at materialization of information as this kind of morphing or lofting between segments of information. The last 2 projects will be looking at notion of bands of repetition and iteration, where a band could carry information, could receive information, or could become benches, could become physical information. The last project is a project that we decided to choose and develop more, so obviously it looks better because it has been developed also. But project that become at the same time a receptor of information, of projection, but also an ambiguity between 2D and 3D, between horizontal and vertical, between paint line and physical building. And we made a survey today, and we are digging foundation tomorrow, and hopefully we'll get part of this element, again based on rhythm, on line, that speak to each other in a way, as if information contained in the position of the band allow it to be structurally would be a bit reinforced, but be a canopy, or be a bench, or be a surfaced project, or to receive information. It's a small passage where people would go in between under this canopy and into their practice. The elevation, the kind of structural plan, and I think on a pedagogical level, as much as on a professional level, how do you go from the quality of the matter, as Henry Bergson has been writing really eloquently about matter and memory, about the mind and the body, about the physical element, what, as Weekend was saying, what does a brick want, what does a steel tube want, what can we do, and the information, the history of information, the understanding of information, the experience of information. And I think the word experience in that sense is very important. How do you touch those elements? How do you look at those elements? How do you sit on those elements? So hopefully, and I have to thank Nora for organizing this, as much as the municipality of Amman, we'll have this experimental piece in your city, and we would love to have your question, but also your feedback on the building piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to give just 5 seconds for those of you standing to find a spot or a piece of floor to sit on. There are 2 chairs here. And I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon to this event. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start. Pay attention. Hello? Okay. Bernard Khouri is an award-winning architect from Lebanon, graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design and Harvard University's GSD. He taught design studio in several architecture schools, including l'École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, l'École Spéciale d'Architecture in Paris, and the American University of Beirut. He set up his practice in 1993, and since then his office has developed an international reputation and a portfolio of high diversity on both a local and international level. He's lectured and exhibited in prestigious academic institutions around the world, including a solo show of his work at Edis Gallery in Berlin in 2003, and participated in group shows including New Prison at the Fondazione San Dresden in Torino in 2008, and Space at the opening show of the Max Museum in Rome in 2010. And I think you all agree, personal inspiration to every architecture student and young architect in the region. So very happy to have you here, Amman. Thank you very much.
Can we have the lights off? Good evening. I'm not very good friends with theory. I find my preferred grounds of experimentation in the very sour and difficult realities of our cities through my commissions and through practical projects, and sometimes less practical projects. But for the purpose of this lecture, I will try to theorize. And the theme will be tonight speed. So we'll be talking maybe in relatively theoretical terms, but we'll be navigating through practical, sometimes less practical experiences I've had in the last 15, 20 years or so. So first with this image, which brings me back to my school years. I studied architecture in the late 80s until the early 90s in the US. But at the time I used to move back and forth to Paris and had the chance to attend a lecture and meet at some point Paul Virilio. I know this is a very 80s name to bring about, but at the time I was very fascinated by Virilio. Why? Because Virilio talks about speed, and I've always been fascinated by speed. As a little kid, and throughout until now. And Virilio talks about speed, and I will be talking about speed and my work at three levels of speed. Animal speed, mechanical speed, and the speed of light. But these are Virilio's terms. I did not invent anything. This is a very basic understanding of Virilio's work and the relationship he tries to establish between speed and our practice, architecture and the making of cities, and culture and even politics in general. This image to the far left is the fastest man, the man sitting down, the naked man. He's moving at the speed of light. In fact, he's not moving. And then there's a slight regression, quite an important regression in the order of speed. This symbolizes mechanical speed. Here, I think it's the 2009 McLaren Mercedes Formula One. And then another regression in the order of speed, the naked man running. This is animal speed. And then detention speed. We'll talk about detention speed later. So, Virilio says that up until the 19th century, we've evolved at animal speed. We've moved at animal speed as our bodies moved autonomously or on the back of, on top of a camel, on top of a horse. So we've discovered space at animal speed. And then at some point, I'd say probably around, at some point around the 19th century, there was an important acceleration and we moved from animal speed to mechanical speed. And with that came the Industrial Revolution, modernity and modernism in architecture as we know it, World explosions and everything that followed. That was a slight acceleration of moving in space from animal speed to automobile speed or the speed of the train, or maybe the speed of sound with the Concorde or the planes. But that was a slight acceleration in very low terms. Not a very important one, although it might have had very important impact on our culture, on our planet, on the demography of our planet. But more importantly, there is an important break when we move from animal speed to from mechanical speed to the speed of light, because at this point we're no longer moving. So we will try to go through my work and look at my work through those three modes, those three speeds. From the fastest, the speed of light, mechanical speed, and then animal speed. I will briefly talk about detention speed. Why detention speed? This image comes from a piece I've worked on. The piece is called Prisoner of War. This was for a group show where we were invited to work on the space of incarceration. I think the show was called New Prison. And I worked on a piece, which you see here, which is not a prison, it's in fact a capsule, a carcass. Very, very serious in the sense that this is built around a lexicon of military terms that we took from a military dictionary, literally an American military dictionary. And we've picked up words, and we've built the piece literally on the logic of these words. It strangely looks like an F-117 bomber, except we've chopped off its wings. The F-117 bomber was, I think, the first US stealth bomber, a very sophisticated plane that moves extremely fast. Yet here it's reduced in scale, we've chopped off its wings, and it moves extremely slowly, not even at the speed of a biped, but the speed of a rampant. And here the prisoner, in fact, this device was invented to be the carcass that protects the prisoner as he's being released through the demarcation line to make it back to his camp. But as he's crawling, he is literally scanning the territory that separates the two camps, and he is serving those who just released him. So he becomes a traitor. The eyes of the machine are not the eyes of the prisoner because he's completely blinded, and he listens to orders given to him by those who have released him, who are telling him to move left or right as he's moving forward. So he's scanning the territory and he's going back to his camp. There's a 5-6 minute video that comes with this piece, which is quite disturbing, so I'll spare you the show. So from let's call it more experimental grounds, a bit removed from our daily practice of architecture, to more pragmatic and practical examples. Here we're literally at animal speed, and literally the physical experience of the space taken to its absurd proportions. This is the two twin chalets or villas all over Holland, situated at around 2,000 meters of altitude in Mount Lebanon, right next to the ski resorts. A single flight of stairs that takes you up onto the facade, and they take you to the pool in which you can literally levitate at 2,000 meters of altitude, 360 degrees above the mountains. This is a purely physical experience, so we're moving very slowly here. Another very practical example of architecture in its very material sense of the term, and very slow and very humble. Here, the parents wake up, get on their balconies, walk down the stairs, turn around, an olive tree, make a cup of coffee in the kitchen, pick up the newspaper in the living room, and walk down to their kids' rooms without ever walking inside. So the physical movement on the facade literally draws the facade. And there's nothing else but that in the facade. So no gimmicks, no shapes, no geometry. And this idea of literally moving and shaping the facades by moving on the facades is something I've been very passionate about in my apartment buildings in Beirut, because we've been fighting a hegemonic model that for the last 30 or 40 years has created very blind buildings. On the contrary, my buildings are very much open to their environment, very Mediterranean in a way. This is again another apartment building where you can literally move from any room in the apartment to any other room or kitchen or whatever without ever walking inside if you felt like it. And this literally shapes the building, the plan, the section. Perhaps our most absurd project at this point, which is now under construction and might be called the Hotel de Beirut. In fact, it's a couple of towers on the same site. One of them is a residential tower, the other one is a hotel. It's located near the port of Beirut, and you can see that the port literally has a very obvious influence on this building. This is a building that has parts of it that literally move and fly. Not metaphorically, but literally, and you'll see in a second. So for those of you who know Beirut, this is the main artery penetrating the Beirut Central District from the northeastern edge. Now, watch this bar. It's I think 2 or 3 floors above street level, and it moves up. So at some point, you can be in the bar, and the whole bar goes up, so that you're literally facing the sea at a high altitude, close to 100 meters. We also proposed for those extreme physical, very physical, very material, and sometimes pushed to extremes experiences of the city. We proposed, but this won't make it, the bar will, but not the pool. We proposed a pool that will also move at very high altitude up in the sky. So if you're a guest in the hotel, you can book the pool, and you can swim in a pool that has windows that enable you to literally fly and levitate above the city. And here's the bar again. My buildings were and are very often influenced by the movement of cars around them. So this is the first construction I ever completed and built. It's a nightclub located at the northeastern edges of Beirut. It's a building that goes to sleep during the day, so it's completely invisible. When we worked on this site initially, everybody thought we were going to do something extremely visible, because this highway, this sort of boulevard is very important. It's probably one of the densest automobile boulevards of the country. It's literally the north-south axis that runs along the whole coast of the country. So everybody on this axis really tries to screen physically and be present. We did exactly the contrary, but strangely, the more invisible the building was, at least materially, the more visible it became to me. So during the day you don't see it, and he wakes up at night and starts, sounds come out of it because it's a music club. The building is literally sculpted by the mechanics and hydraulics that activate its roof. And this is me. But you can see that this building is literally, the current is very important in this building, as the cars are parked in carousel formation around the club. So as you arrive to the club by car, you experience the club inside and outside. There's no clear limit between the parking lot and the club itself. The parking lot is the club, and the club is a parking lot. This is another automobile building, or highway building. This is the first prototype pavilion branch, commercial branch for a bank, for which we were doing the architectural identity for this project dates back 2003, 2004. It's located about 12 minutes away from the Syrian border. And you perceive this car literally at 100 kilometers an hour or more as you drive very fast there. The building turns its back to Damascus. At the time, we collected Syrian cash in plastic bags, as there were no private banks in Syria. And Lebanon had quite a sophisticated banking system and a tradition in banking. So as our idiot politicians were going to get instructions on this road to Syria, there was money being sucked out of Syria and into Lebanese banks, coming literally cut under blankets and coming in plastic bags to be stored in Lebanese banks. So this was a sort of a revenge to the Assad regime at the time, where we were turning our butt to Damascus and literally spitting money out of the mouth of the building through a cash machine distributor. So the building is a carcass, essentially, very much introverted. This is another highway building or highway intervention on that same northern highway, north of Beirut, where it wasn't really important what we were building. What was important was to scream on the highway. My client owns this building next door, which is a clothing, fashion, retail outlet, and owns many plots around it. And as the plot I was given, which is a small plot, had to comply with a 20-meter setback from the highway, what was most important for my client was to have a presence, a visual presence on the highway. Again, a building to be perceived at 100 kilometers an hour. What the building is, and you see it here, it's essentially a volume behind, which was never really functional. And it didn't matter really that the restaurant or the diner or whatever he tried to do in the building did not function. It made no difference. What was important was that he was present on the highway and screened and made more visual noise through a big LED screen, which initially was supposed to retransmit in real time images taken from inside the retail store, but that was judged to be a bit too voyeuristic or too pornographic. So it was replaced by fashion clips, a drive-through ATM machine as a structural base for it, and the highway vitrine, habitable vitrine. Later, a few years later, I was commissioned by the same client. In the meantime, he expanded and bought much more property along that axis. And I was asked to design the extension of the retail building, which was also going to house the art collection of my client, who in the meantime had become a very important art collector. He owns now, I think, over 1,000 important pieces, and probably one of the largest private collections of contemporary art in the Middle East. Essentially, what this project is a building that tries to blur the limits between what fashion, consumerism is and what contemporary art is, and trying to put them sort of under the same roof. But very importantly, it is also a building that is meant to be perceived at a very fast speed. So this is not an urban building, this is a building that you perceive on the highway as you're zipping by. And what we had proposed is three elements: a base that deals with the circulation of the car, an apparatus that literally takes you into first experience of the building as you're in an automobile, and then the main body of the building is framed and contains what would have been the largest backlit stretched canvas in the world, and above that, what would have been the longest bar in the world. We're talking 110 meters long. So the structure of the building is a generic structure, and I had to do what was the most practical for them as a parking, as a generic space that could be either retail or art foundation. It made no difference to me. As retail is as cultural to me as contemporary art is. If anything, could be even more culturally relevant, as in my opinion, many museums are in my eyes the cemetery of culture. So at the base is a strange dispositif, which deals with a very particular situation. This stretch of the road, which is right underneath the highway, sort of a secondary road, running parallel to the highway, changes direction according to time. As our road infrastructure in Lebanon is so bad, we have to rely on these sort of tricks. So when there's a lot of traffic in one way, we sort of liberate the highway or decongest the highway by opening up a secondary road into one direction, and then later in the afternoon it changes direction. So the idea is to take the car in both directions, depending on the hours of the day, into the drop-off zone and down into the parking in and out, depending on the time of the day. And then, again, the generic structure goes up, and this is where the stretch backlit canvas, which you can open at any point to get the art pieces on out, and then the bar above, which would be exposed to the highway and to the sea on the other side. This is the black box building, which I told you a second ago. So this is what it could have been, backlit at night. And on this stretch of highway, the reason why we made such an absurdly blind facade is because for those of you who know this northern highway, Boulevard or Costa, whatever it is called, most of the buildings on this stretch of road have become completely blindfolded by signs. And the vertical facades of these buildings have become much more valuable than the actual floor plates of these buildings. And to me, it symbolizes really the end of architecture in a way as we conceived it traditionally. These buildings, most of these buildings on this stretch of highway were built on very basic, if anything, basic typologies that were very generic buildings with very basic repetitive floor plates. And as this stretch of highway became more and more dense with traffic, the buildings are completely dead now. And they serve as bases, as structures for very large signs, which have now become very, very valuable advertising space. So my building at the end of the day becomes, my intervention in my building is only 7 meters wide, because the rest of it I'm not really concerned about. Anything can happen. So the inhabitable space, except for the bar, in fact, is not even designed by me, and I'm not concerned by it. Strangely, I also became one of the billboards, 40 meters high here. I'm standing very proud, above Paris Hilton, walking on it literally as I became the mascot of the Johnny Walker Scotch whiskey in 2000 and, I don't remember, 11 maybe, 10, 11. We see a lot of non-urban buildings, a lot of automobile buildings in the Gulf, and a lot of the Gulf states and a lot of the Gulf cities are developed on the American model and are very much automobile cities. This is my first project in Kuwait, so it's quite old, but this was supposed to be a very high performance shopping mall. I love to call it the Formula One of malls because it was built upon literally, it was a literal translation of the ultimate diagram of performance. And you know, the malls are built on extremely, extremely intricate tricks and plans where architects don't have much to do, basically comply with the logic which is dictated by so-called experts, retail experts or consultants. So architects become very, very secondary when it comes to designing malls, particularly American malls, because they're becoming too sophisticated for us architects. So they are literally accepted it, took that, made a plan out of that, and tried to work on the performance of the mall as a very serious exercise. It also derives from the parking lot, as this is an automobile building by excellence. And then at some point in the building, because there were I saw a lot of absurd installations, entertainment installations that are part of the malls in the Arabian Gulf, I integrated the skydrop structure into the building that would take the Kuwaiti kids 50 meters off the ground in a fraction of a second, up in a very warm, unbearable climatic situation, and then back down into the very controlled situation of the wall inside. So that's the track of the scaffold. So it becomes part of the building. Another sort of installation, this is in Beirut, more recent. I like to call them in French des dispositifs, they're apparatuses. Sometimes they no longer resemble buildings because they're a literal translation of sometimes very absurd setups. Here, it's a fitness center on the landfill in the Beirut Central District for a temporary installation. I think no more than 6-7 years initially. Again, the car is extremely central, as this part of the city is still not really part of the fabric, so you never get to it really walking, but you get to it by car. And the drop-off becomes an absurd 40 meters, I think, deep arch, 14 meters high. Perhaps the most absurd residential development we're working on right now, but we started working on this thing 2-3 years ago, it's under construction. It should be complete in the next 6 months, is an apartment building located in the industrial sector, Beirut, where you literally drive your car into your apartment. So you drive your car into an elevator, the elevator goes up, and you can drive your car into your apartment. Obviously, this is not a family apartment building, it's more like an apartment building for playboys. So it's under construction. This is a project we worked on a bit outside of the routine of the office. This was one of the first 10 pieces commissioned for the new collection of the Maxi Museum, for the opening show of the Maxi Museum in Rome. I think it was in 2010, where I was obviously called in as a prisoner of the geopolitical. I was a geopolitical kid, so others could deal with other issues, but I was prisoner again and again of the same issues as I am the Arab, and I cannot talk about anything but the political misery of the place I come from when I go to Europe. So geopolitics, I talked about consuming Beirut, and this really is the outcome of a position I've been taking in the last few years, a position relative to the work of some of my colleagues, not the architects, but the contemporary artists, who really have surfed the wave of these issues of memory and war, and again what I call our political bankruptcy and our cultural misery. So I feel that Beirut and a lot of things about Beirut really fall under that register. And it's anything is that we cannot be perceived outside of that. I guess Amman, to a certain extent, also has the same problem. As much as a lot of other Arab cities have the same problem. So we mapped in Beirut various points that have been fetishized. They span from the Corniche to the Holiday Inn Hotel, that is one of the last relics of the war, to the southern suburbs of Beirut, where we could fantasize about Hezbollah and many other things. And we imagined that these points could be connected and could be the an absolutely wild circuit for the very curious Westerner who would like to consume the city very, very fast, as if you were flipping a magazine or going through a contemporary art show maybe in some museum at the Tate or at Beaubourg or somewhere else. And we would connect these points by a circuit that would materialize literally by these tracks. And then the circuit would obviously go through some of these points of interest. As I said earlier, the Holiday Inn Hotel has been fetishized now as one very intense piece of architecture and beyond architecture, as it is one of the last relics and the last standing ruin of the very violent years that span between 1975 and 1990. So here you can literally go through the Holiday Inn, penetrate it, split second in and out. And in order to do that, we had to invent the capsule that will take that tourist, place his head in the detonator of the bomb, and literally take him at very fast speeds through the city. We fabricated the bomb. This is the bomb and the elevator that leads to my office. And then we carried the bomb in the city under the tracks. We literally put the bomb in various locations. This is near the river of Beirut, supposed river, Beirut. On the Corniche. Some people were interested, others were not. But again, to go back to this issue of speed and why was I talking about speed? Why did I want to talk about speed in various forms through my work? Because speed, I think speed, and again to use Virido's terms, and matter are very much connected and have a lot to do with one another. These are ideas and issues I was very concerned about since my early years of studies. This is a project I worked on in 1991, so at the time I must have been 22 years old. And this was right after the so-called Civil War. And this was an act of resistance, I saw it at the time, to what was happening in the Beirut Central District, where the ruins of the war were being bulldozed, and we were completely wiping out all traces of 15 years conflict. And at the time, I still was not in Beirut. I was still in my academic cocoon at Harvard, and I thought I should do something. And it was not really about the nostalgia of supposedly or so-called historical buildings, as I chose to work on a totally generic building that had absolutely no historical value, as much as it was about this issue of scarring the city. And I called this project Evolving Scars. And the idea was, what do you do at this impossible moment that we call the after-war, which in fact is a very dangerous simplification of history, as war does not start and stop at a very specific moment in time. It did not start on April 17, 1975, and it was not done and over with the Triumph Accords. And I was very convinced of that already back in 1991. So the idea was, how do we scar the city? We cannot move from a state of malady to the state of being totally cured in a split second by the use of bulldozer and then applying a new master plan with very clean, crisp buildings on it. The idea here was to imagine a sort of a performative installation that could happen on these buildings that were condemned to disappear anyway, and to try to work on the scarring process. And this project would happen in phases. At the beginning, we would seal the ruin in a double membrane, transparent membrane, in such a way that the building would no longer be penetrable. It would no longer be a building. It would be an object that is completely encased in the membrane. And then I introduced what I call the memory collector. The memory collector is a machine that was supposed to record people's memories of the place, of the city, or various memories that are relevant to that very specific building. And as soon as this apparatus would be operational, the idea is that as the memory is being collected, the building would be disintegrated, it would be demolished by this machine. The more memory is collected, the more demolition. And so the demolition would be a result of the memory that is being collected. I went very scientifically and very seriously, I went about quantifying in cubic meters the amount of matter that had to be demolished. And I did the exact, I provided the exact amount of volume in the double-sided membrane in such a way that when we would completely demolish the building, the double-sided membrane would be completely full. So we get to the point of almost full saturation of the membrane as the building inside has almost totally disappeared. But this would be also done in proportion, it would be proportional to the amount of memory that the memory collector could take. We're back in 1991. There is no internet, or at least not to me. So this is happening at a very physical space, on a very specific point. This would be the point of saturation. The structure would completely implode. I look back at this project and I think it's politically very naive, as I was very much far away from the political realities of the context, as at the time I had great illusions about the rebuilding of a nation, which obviously did not happen, and is still not happening, and will probably never happen. This was a very naive idea in the sense that I thought that we could work on a collective memory, and we can, if anything, architecturalize this. We could work on a consensual memory. We could work on a consensual history. Obviously, this was impossible. And with ideas like that, I came back to Beirut and did not build for quite a long time. But what's more important to me is to look back at this from an architectural point of view and from the angle of at least the theoretical issue we're trying to raise tonight, is this issue of speed and the relationship of speed and matter. A lot of architects have worked on the idea of dematerialization. I'm obviously certainly not the first one, certainly not the last one to approach this issue. But it's very interesting to see to what extent we have been, we're very, very far away from what Paul Virilio called these technological transfers. Architecture has stopped, the closest it has been to this matter of dematerialization is really being metaphorical. Huh? So us architects talk about dematerialization through metaphors, through the reconstruction of our architectural language, through twists and really forced twists and bendings of buildings, and architectural acrobacies and structural acrobacies and really acrobatics, which in fact end up being much heavier than the much simpler stuff. So we are really hostages and prisoners of matter. We build with stone. We are in fact trapped in the Stone Age. So as a young student, 21, 22 years old, I'm wondering, what the hell am I going to do in the Stone Age when something much more interesting is happening? To use Virilio's words, we are living in a material world. We're moving towards something else. We're not even physically moving. And here I am trapped at 21, 22 years old, thinking that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be making buildings out of stone, concrete, and steel. How disastrous for somebody who wants to be engaged with modernity. So this building to me is interesting, this project for me is interesting because it's an attempt at least to make architecture out of the disappearance of matter, but not in a metaphorical way, but literally, in a literal way, where the disappearance of matter is the literal result of the accumulation of another form of memory, where the physical memory is disappearing and is being replaced by another type of memory. Beirut has 6 archaeological layers under it. And the idea here was that the 7th layer would no longer be stone or concrete, but it would be the memory that was collected throughout the scarring process. This is a piece that I also produced for a group show back in 2006. I call it the cemetery of my work. What it basically is a pod that was installed in a gallery that happens to be literally above my studio space, above my office. And the plan of the gallery is literally the same plan as my office. I didn't do it on purpose, it just happened to be that way. Gallery Sphere Center, which is a very serious gallery in Germany, moved to Beirut back in 2003, 2004, and I was invited to one of the shows, and I was invited to show my architectural work. And as I thought that my work could not be shown in drawings or photos, I tried to explore the limits of the representation of my work through drawings or photos by establishing a relationship between the gallery space above and my office below. My office is known for its red floor. It keeps the people nervous in my office, and I do it on purpose. So I have a red epoxy floor in the office. The gallery upstairs is very wide. This is a true section in the building office downstairs, the pod upstairs. And the idea is that when you go into the pod, you grab by the balls and you're lifted up, you head into the pod, your feet 1.5 meters or so above the ground, and there are 8 screens that run simultaneously and take you through a journey that takes about 5, 6, 7 minutes to the archives of my unbuilt works. In the very far background is a panorama taken on the roof of the building that shows in the backdrop the space for which these buildings were created but never made it. So they're roaming above the floor of my office, which extends out, but they're deprived of any materiality and they don't touch the ground. So they're really calibers. They're no longer architectural projects in my eyes. They're just forms and shapes. And this is the limit of what architecture can be, in my opinion, at least in my work, beyond its experience. Just a shape and a collection of forms and nothing else. They're not meant to be experienced. They're just meant to be looked at as shapes. And this is a succession of scenes taken from the pod, a 360-degree view of the gallery, taken from the point at which the pod is being put, and then it slowly morphs from the gallery into my office space, and you see the red taking over, and all the stuff in my office. I think you're halfway through, and at some point my office starts to dematerialize, and then you're taken into a completely material playground where the red remains and the objects which are no longer projects roam, and in the very far background the city or the space for which they were created. So speed, I like motorcycles. I come to my office every morning on my bike, and when it rains I don't get out of the office and I cancel my appointments because I like speed. So that would be it for tonight. Thank you very much.
I almost don't want to turn the lights on. I think we were taken to then we get to see the wooden panels. Can Thank you. So we're gonna move on to the next session. Okay. So we're gonna do half an hour conversation, but it would be really great if nobody leaves during that time. So if you really have to go, perhaps you can leave now. It sort of disrupts the discussion, and that's just a request. Leading the conversation will be Jumana Jabri. Where is she? Here. Jumana Jabri is a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design and of the Euro MBA. She has practiced between Beirut, Amman, Riyadh, and Dubai. Her interest in multidisciplinary projects led her to work with Ramzi Jabir on founding Visualizing Palestine, which is a follow-up project of TEDx Ramallah 2011. She also co-founded Fabrique, through which she worked on public space in highly dense environments, including Burj al-Barajne refugee camp in 2003. She's taught architecture at the American University of Beirut and has contributed to publications on society, architecture, and the city, including Amman 2010 and Abitare. Thank you, Jumana, for joining us tonight. And please, Bernard and Fred, you can join us on the stage.
a couple of years after I actually left the practice of architecture, and after having also experienced working in Bernard's office, which is something architects are lucky to go through. Frederick, I met you briefly in Dubai and recently got to know your work more, and obviously more so today. So I'll try to make the talk here brief so that it opens up to all of you for questions. So if anyone has questions to prepare. Bernard, I'll start with a question I've had for a long time, asking myself actually about it, is Bernard Houli is cloned, let's say, 10 times, 50 times, and the city of Beirut is filled with your work. At what point would you say the city can't handle my work anymore?
No, cloned, what do you mean by cloned?
Meaning, you wouldn't be able to, in a lifetime, probably to cover an entire city, but if your architecture was to fill a city entirely.
Catastrophic. Catastrophic. No, but I haven't built much. It's just now that we're beginning to see some of the permanent buildings come up, but the first 6 buildings that I built were temporary buildings and had a very short life expectancy, which is a very awkward thing for an architect because we're trained to build and we're trained to think permanent. Architecture is a permanent thing. Buildings are permanent, at least as far as I'm concerned. I don't believe in any afterlife. So I was trained and educated thinking that I would build things that are permanent and forever as far as I'm concerned. Because they'll be there when I'm 6 feet on the ground. But the first 6 buildings I'm designing and building are, and I didn't choose it that way, are permanent. So it says if you're pregnant, or not permanent. So it says if you're pregnant and you're told that your kid's going to live 5 years and 3 months, and you'll be wiped out after that. So this is how I started my career. In fact, I started my career designing things that never saw the light. And then the second stage was non-permanent, very temporary buildings. So now that I'm beginning to build, I'm going to continue building because I'm not going to give it up. My first permanent building was finished in 2006, 2007. So that's not long ago. 90% of what I produced remained unbuilt. I have over 150 buildings, 150 projects in my archives, and not theoretical projects that were commissioned. So yes, we produced them. We end up producing at a very fast pace, but we never know what's going to survive and what's going to make it, and what's going to remain the caliber and the symmetry that I showed you at the end.
Can you perhaps clarify to the audience what you mean by non-permanent? So your first project...
Non-permanent are buildings that, well, these 6 buildings were built on sites that were leased. So there was a rental contract on the site. And there are zones I call zones of convalescence. They're areas that haven't reached their real estate maturity. So at this point in time, when the client comes to me, he's not willing to build, or the owner is not willing to build to its full capacity on the site, the maximum built-up area. So in the meantime, they do something temporary, which exploits 5, 10, 15, 20%, 25% of what the site can take. But obviously this will not remain forever, as the real estate value of the site at some point catches up with what we're doing on the site. And at that point in time, the building gets wiped out. So when we rented these plots, the owners of the plots were very keen on giving a very, very short lease, as they were expecting that the real estate value would catch up very quickly. I'm very lucky, the first 6 buildings are still alive. The first one was supposed to be wiped out in November 2002. It's still beating, it's still living. But until when, I don't know.
Frederick, what's your take on permanence in architecture? And at the same time, you speak a lot about information. If you can, what is information in what you're speaking about in your architecture?
I mean, I think as when I was saying about trying to build building, I mean, I like that he said that someone's building are permanent. I mean, nothing is permanent. Everything changes. It is true that some have this label that they are to be there forever, but as we know, everything changes. It seems the only constant is change. So, I think through this idea of speed that Bernard talked about, or information, or materialization of information that I talked about, I think we see some constructed environment that are not necessarily as rigid, as physical as they used to be. We see an architecture that needs to be more maybe responsive to events. Somebody like Chumi has been doing a lot about event architecture. I think that potentially firework could be considered as architecture. We see events such as the Olympic Games that I showed before, or soccer game, or things like that that are kind of almost ritual, almost. I mean, these Olympic Games have been used to regenerate cities quickly, or destroy the stage, or we want to see. I'm not even talking about war or about things like that. But I think we are working toward something that is potentially less material, that is potentially lighter, that is potentially faster changing. But on the other hand, you know, anything we make is, we are not fully responsible for how long it will last.
But don't you think that we have failed as a practice, architecture, I say we, all of us, have failed to really engage with what Virilio called technological transfers? And to what extent is architecture becoming or getting close to anything that we can call immaterial? It is still as material as it ever was. And I realized that in the last 20, 30, 40 years, as we've tried to engage with this as architects, all we've produced are just material transvestites of phenomena that are just formal gimmicks, representations, but purely visual, and if anything heavier, much heavier than what our grandfathers used to do. So at the end of the day, the question I'm asking myself, and I've been asking myself this question for quite a while, is it really about architecture as we know it? Or is it really about abandoning some of the very core constituents of our practice and trying to seriously engage with transferring what used to be the matter we work with that is material by something else? And that, I think we haven't even tried to do. I think architecture is really dragging behind and is further and further away from what is governing our cultures today. I think architecture, even as a practice, I don't want to draw a dark picture, but it's becoming less and less relevant, even in shaping cities or in shaping systems of power. Today, the bank no longer invests necessarily on its buildings, it invests on something else. A government invests on something else, no longer on buildings. So we're really dragging behind, and the more we think that we're engaging with this, we're not. We're doing it amongst ourselves by using signs that we think are the product of that, by producing blobs and twists and things like that. But in reality, all it is just a transvestite, a very superficial take on a phenomenon that is way beyond us and is no longer a material phenomenon. So, what do? I mean, we might be old schmucks, but the guys here who are younger than us should really ask themselves this question. It's not by trying to, play the Eisenman trick or whoever, or the, I forget their names, these people who do blobs and all sorts of weird, funny shapes, that we're really engaging with this. This is much more serious. But what do we do? I don't know. I don't have an answer.
Well, I think one of the interesting part is that we do not have an answer. It's what I call a productive paradox. We know it's a question to architecture. We know it's a critical question to architecture. But we also know we are not finding an answer, as you are saying. I kind of agree with this idea of kind of an expressionism of something that by the time you translate it into matter, it becomes kind of a support for something else, but by itself it's still very much matter. But it doesn't mean that we need to close shop and say, well, you know, this is done. I think it's something that can play around. I think new generation can research that, can try.
Frederick, what is the question that we're trying to address anyway in terms of information? Is it just because, is it the natural flow of the progression because the world is including information in the abstract sense in terms of really just digital devices at the end of the day, that architecture needs to even address that question? Why should it even look into that beyond the infrastructure, which actually we're sitting in a city that actually is lagging behind, and the region that's lagging behind in the basic infrastructure of information transfer?
Well, I think the first question is to question what is architecture. You know, is architecture, and people use the term everywhere. You know, I think Rumsfeld was an architect of the invasion of something, and you have information architecture, you have a network system architecture, you have all sorts of architecture. When we talk about architecture, it's a profession. Goes from real estate developer to some people doing detail for staircase. It's a very broad term that nobody exactly knows what it is about. I mean, you can talk to IT people and they will say that they are architects, software, or something like that. So, what do we mean by architect? I think that's the first question. And is it trying to organize and shape environment, and in that sense, out of the environment, system, network, or physical, or virtual, or digital? That would be one question. The second question, first answer is architecture more in the classical sense of what we used to know architecture about fabricating, building space. I think it's really that first question. What do we mention? What do we mean by art? Is generating idea about architecture being an art? Is it writing about architecture being an art? Is it so? I would say well, that's
the
one
basic practice that here you're talking about what an architect is, but architecture is there is a need which human beings will continue to have regardless of the speed and technology and so on. That is very basic, which is at the level of shelter or density or yeah. So the animal. So why? So you're moving on to the multiple definitions of an architect, but the actual need of space continues. So I'm trying to capture.
Well, one could argue that the basic sheltering is something we can almost leave to engineer. We could say that we have mastered that, we know how to do that, we can reproduce that. How do we maybe get a quality of space everywhere? And why does it mean this quality of space? In that sense, is it purely related to the physical environment, or could there be other layer of information that are bringing this condition? But as Bella is suggesting, we don't really know. Maybe it's just the movement of the sun and the shadow, going back to phenomenological basic conditions. To say, well, this is enough. This is what we can do with stone and bricks. On the other hand, we also know that now when you build a building, what costs almost as much as the concrete and the steel is air conditioning, is electricity, is a network system, is IT, it's all of that. You mentioned bankers investing some money into their building, but a lot of money into their system, their security. So I think it's a question. I think it's accepting that. I think we need to accept that category of the category are not that simple. I think we're living in a very complex environment with a lot of layers. And I think we need to see if some of those layers overlap, interfere, inform each other, or if they are fairly distant. But I think we need to be stupid to think that those layers are distant. They have some interference, they have some interaction. The question is, how do we measure, how do we value those?
Right now, which city would actually push your architecture in very different directions that you'd like to explore that you can't explore inside Beirut or Lebanon? Or that you've maybe already moved forward with?
Believe it or not, I was not tempted at all by the Gulf cities until I was dragged into the project. I think it was in 2002, and realized that sometimes the least tempting situations can be the most explosive ones. And throughout my journey in the Gulf, I'd say there was intensive between 2002 and 2008, 2009, until the crash. I lived very absurd and very explosive situations. And realized that I no longer envied my colleagues who were attempting to build in Berlin or Rotterdam or other places, because I thought that there were very burning questions, in fact far more relevant, that could be asked in Kuwait, in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in Bahrain, these cities that didn't tempt me to begin with, far more urgent and far more fundamental than the questions that are raised in what I call the dormant cities, where there are consensual values that are shared by everybody, where the good and the bad is quite obvious, at least at the fundamentals. I'm talking politically. I thought between 2002 and 2008, and I still want to believe that it's possible, that an architect can have a political role in this part of the world like nowhere else. And not through institutional projects, because institutional projects are very consensual. You cannot be subversive when you're building a museum or public housing. No, you have to recognize the authority for whom you build. So you can be subversive in secondary questions that have to do with architectural masturbation and other stuff like that. But the fundamental, the political stuff, is very obvious. So even the bad boys in France or Germany or wherever, or Holland, at the end of the day, are very conventional in their thinking, politically, in terms of the fundamentals. But when you're building a hotel in Riyadh or in Amman, you're not accountable politically for what you're saying. When you're building a nightclub in Beirut on the site of the foreign massacre, you're not accountable politically. There's no political consensus you have to comply with. These are territories that allow you to explore through the private sector, through what is initially a banal project. You can go very far, particularly in cities that are developing at such a fast pace, such as Dubai, Qatar, and many Gulf cities. Unfortunately, we totally missed the boat. And if you look at what happened in the last 10 years in the Gulf cities, it's a complete catastrophe. There's not a single relevant building built in Dubai, not one, that's produced me. It's all crap. Nothing, zero, nada. Why? Because we rely on imports. Because if you want to be modern, you have to come on Foster or Zaha Hadid, or John Vell, or Renzo Piano, God knows who. Because us Arabs, we cannot be modern. We become morons, idiots.